Let's get going. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Robert Pittman, director of the Janus Institute and the Janus Forum, and I'm speaking to you from Northeast Georgia. I'm sheltering in place at Lake Raven, at least that's my story and I'm sticking to it, where it's a beautiful summer day, and I hope it is where you are. I understand that Pat Topping, who's with us, is on Lake Sinclair, so the lake's a good place to be today. When we did one of our first webinars back in March on the topic of COVID-19 and economic development, we all hoped we'd be back to normal in a few months. But, you know, like a bad check, COVID keeps bouncing back. We all read the headlines and see what's happening. And in some areas, it's worse than before. Many businesses are still shuttered and many may never come back. I read the other day where one of the travel advisory companies said, 60% of the restaurants are shut now. We've seen record economic contraction, and schools are struggling. They're struggling to reopen for in-person education, but many that have tried to reopen have closed again. I read that Europe is battling a resurgence. I looked at some graphs the other day of the cases by month, and oh man, what we saw in July and are seeing in August is sometimes in excess of what we saw earlier. And I guess the ultimate insult is that COVID-19 is really playing havoc with our college football schedule. I mean, those of us in the Southeastern Conference that are actually real diehard fans might get a little football, but many people in the other part of the country aren't getting it. So it's clear to me, at least, that we'll be living with this pandemic and aftermath for a while. And we wanted to dig deeper into what the longer term effects might be for communities and for economic development. Now, we don't have a crystal ball, and we can speculate as well as anybody. But at the Janus Institute and Janus Forum, as those of you know that have been to our meetings, our tradition is to turn to the collective knowledge and experience of our economic development family. So we conducted a survey in July, late June and July, to get a boots on the ground assessment of how COVID-19 has affected communities and what those long-term effects might be. So today we're going to share the results of that survey with you and get into a discussion of the future of economic development in the new normal. We understand you have busy schedules, and we will keep it under 45 minutes today. And Amanda, the next slide, please. And joining us this morning is Amanda Sutt, the CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, marketing and branding firm in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And also her daughter Imogen, I understand, is with us today, playing with her blocks on the desk next to Amanda. We hope Imogen has some great comments today. Rock, Paper, Scissors is our partner in Prosperous Places. That's our new initiative to help empower communities to move forward. Good morning, Amanda. Morning, Amanda.
Good morning. There we go. Multitasking a little much there. So good to see everybody here today.
You bet. And then our special guest this morning is Mark Arend, and he needs no introduction. He, of course, is editor-in-chief of Site Selection magazine and a long-term observer of the economic development and site selection business. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Thank you. We don't see your cat yet, but we'll be on the lookout.
She'll be here.
Okay. Let me start out by sharing some of our survey results on the impacts of COVID, but I very quickly want to turn to a discussion of what the ongoing and longer-term impacts might be for communities and economic development, especially regarding remote work and business location. And Amanda, would you go to the next slide and explain, please?
Just give everybody a heads up in Janus style. This is really a conversation. So if you guys have questions as we're going through this, post them in the chat, and then we'll have a space at the end. If something is really important, I'm going to keep my eyeballs on it. I'll interrupt Robert and Mark to interject that. So be thinking about some contributions and conversations we want to have, and we'll have space at the end. So please, please, please share.
And we can certainly keep this going afterwards as well with the comments that you send us. And first, we wanted to get a measure of the economic damage to communities, regions, and states at the time of the survey responses, like I said, late June and early July. Now, I must say that the survey results are not based on hard data collected by communities, but rather on the economic developers' best estimate of what happened in their communities, regions, or states. But as you all know, economic developers know their service areas and businesses, and I believe their assessments help us get a clearer picture of what is happening that really gives us a little more detail besides just the numbers that we're reading. And the slide really speaks for itself. Almost half, 47.8% of retail and restaurant businesses, average overall responses, were shut down. And also other sectors were significantly affected. The respondents on average said that 17.1% of their other businesses, things like manufacturing and service firms, were also shut down. And we can go to the next one, Amanda. And then we ask them anecdotally, what are some other examples of challenges and damage that was brought on by the COVID crisis? And by the way, all of the answers to these questions, can't do them all today, obviously, but we do have a report compiled that we will get out to you in the coming days. But just to summarize some of the answers to other issues that came up, one was really surprising, but if you think about it, sort of makes sense. Sales tax in some communities actually increased. And when I say service areas, I mean the communities and the regions and the states that the respondents represented. And they attributed this to, a lot of local shopping and staycations. Up here in Rabun County, our hotel occupancy is way down, but the RV parks are booming. And they're keeping the hotel motel tax and some of the sales tax revenues flowing in. And of course, respondents noted that the shopping and commercial districts were particularly hard hit because the daytime population was not there. Of course, tourism and hospitality took the hit. Tourism's beginning to come back, I guess, in some communities, but with this resurgence of COVID, it could affect that significantly. A lot of respondents commented on the challenge. We were talking earlier before we actually got the webinar kicked off about remote conferences, and that's really putting a disadvantage, put areas that don't have a lot of good broadband in a big disadvantage. Some respondents reported that manufacturers were responding quickly and started producing COVID supplies. And then another comment was childcare issues. And boy, the whole school situation in many communities is really in flux right now. So that could affect the workforce in a whole number of things. Amanda, let's go to the next one. So then we ask our respondents, what about recovery and getting back to the normal, whatever that is again? And 41.4% of them, as you can see, predicted that it's going to be longer than a year. And these responses were about a month ago, and COVID has arguably gotten a little worse since then. So this number might even be higher now. 24% thought it would be within a year, about 20% thought short term. And we can move on, Amanda. And then, of course, if revenues are affected, then what about economic development budgets? Something I know that's near and dear to everybody on this webinar. So we ask them, based on what you've heard, based on what you see in your communities, regions, and states, will COVID-19 crisis have an effect on your organization's economic development budget in this or the next budget cycle? And as you can see, 55% thought that there would be a decrease. One or two or three very brave people thought there might be an increase, and others said there wouldn't be an effect. So looks like we're going to have to be dealing with that. I want to turn now to Mark. Mark, have you spoken to any economic developers about the budget situation or have anything to say about that?
I can't say that we've had direct conversations about their budgets. However, we are seeing a number of economic developers start to sort of re-message their, what they want the industry to know about. For example, we have one advertiser in our July issue, and I would recommend that participants, if you haven't seen the July issue, do so. There's a lot of terrific content on this very topic.
Yes.
One of our advertisers has an ad in that issue that says, and I won't mention who it is, but the line is, "Suddenly smaller can be better. If COVID-19 related health concerns are new priorities for your business, consider moving to the less crowded spaces of this location." So they're actually re-messaging, and we really applaud the fact that they're taking the resources and budgets that they have and making them more effective in today's environment.
So we have to be even almost actually do more with less, because economic development agencies are getting unprecedented demands on them. And we asked them, the respondents, how your economic development agency has adopted. We talked a little bit about this in March, but a lot has happened since then. And a list of responses will be in the report, but some of the common responses included, not surprisingly, facilitating communications among local governments and key stakeholders through Zoom meetings, emails, and all of that. And, when you think about it, in a lot of communities, the Economic Development Organization is a platform for community cooperation. It really is, and the same for a region. So it's no surprise that many economic development agencies are taking a lead in this, and I think it's an opportunity for them to really demonstrate their worth even more. And they served, many economic development agencies also served as a clearinghouse to help local businesses cope with the crisis, sourcing components, information on state, federal, local financial assistance, public health rules, and things like that. I understand not understanding the rules are a big problem for many businesses, especially restaurants, when they can open, when they can't, what they have to do. Do you have to order, fries with that drink in order to be considered food, and all of that stuff? And of course, information to consumers on local businesses that are open, et cetera, et cetera. And then helping their businesses get help through accountants and lawyers and other professional service providers, and setting up hotlines. Mark, you mentioned business retention and expansion, and a lot of messaging and kind of repurposing, if you will. Any other thoughts on that? On what you've seen some of these economic development agencies repurpose, innovative things they might have done?
Yeah, it's attracting businesses will always be important, but nowadays it's about retaining them. And frankly, in this environment, it's about helping them survive, right? I mean, you talked earlier about the businesses that are, really having a hard time, and almost 50% are, closing in some communities. Well, maybe it's up to the economic developer to help businesses shift to e-commerce, right? A lot of these businesses haven't been doing that, or aren't quite sure what to do. So you might know people or have resources that help them kind of get that platform in place, help them survive, help them grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the past. That's the impact of COVID. Let's talk about the future. Amanda, you can go to the next one. Where do we go from here? And I thought these results were pretty sobering. We asked the economic development respondents, do you think the COVID experience will have a long-term effect on more employees working from remote locations? Look at that. 100% said some effect or a significant effect. Now, a lot of articles that I've read, and you may have read, mentioned that remote work doesn't work for some companies. And there are various issues in that. New people coming into the firm, can they get the company culture? Can they kind of learn by osmosis in the office and things like that? But overwhelmingly, our survey respondents thought that it will have a long-term effect on more employees, not all employees, but more employees. And then similar to that is flex time. We asked them if they thought the COVID experience will encourage businesses to experiment with more flexible work hours. And as you can see, the vast majority, 55% significant effect and 37% some effect. Mark, you mentioned the Site Selection magazine July edition, and you have some excellent articles in there. And I know Ron Starner wrote a great article about remote work and what some companies are doing there. Do you want to comment on that some, or what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, it's kind of all over the place, Robert. You know, according to some research that we've seen, 70% of workers want to go back to the office, and only like 12% would prefer to work from home full time. So companies are obviously in the middle of reevaluating how to get back to normal, when to reopen, whether to reopen. In some cases, I know of companies that have no plans to reopen this year, and that could get pushed further into the winter. So it's all over the place. I think we'll talk in a little while about, you know, some options that the industry is looking at in terms of remote and satellite hubs and so forth. But people, by and large, I think would prefer to be in an office environment. Zoom calls are great. We all do them all the time, but it doesn't replace the human interaction. You know, the ability to sit down in a conference room and, you know, hash through things. So people want to get back. Companies are simply figuring out how and when to do that. Right,
and of course, many employees just can't do that.
Yep.
Manufacturing employees, for example, they have to be there to put things together.
Yeah.
Even the white collar workers, the management of manufacturing organizations and many others have to physically be there.
Yeah, laboratory workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And let me ask you this. Conway, of course, manages the International Asset Management Council. I understand you all have canceled your meeting, or not canceled it, but shifted to a remote platform, or what's going on there?
That's right. The fall forum will be virtual, and how we handle the spring forum remains to be seen. But we've partnered with a company that will help us deliver networking as well as, you know, the excellent content that IMC is known for. But it will be a remote experience this fall.
Oh, right. And I would imagine the corporate real estate executives that are IAMC members are having a very interesting time helping their companies figure out what they're going to do in the new normal. Any comment on that, or have you talked to any of them about that?
Yes, we're in touch with the corporate real estate community all the time, and it's a mixed bag, Robert. It's you know, they're all trying to figure out what we are. You know, how do we make the workplace sanitized? You know, what are the guidelines that you know they have to help enforce? You know, what is the policy, if you will, for remote working? So a lot of that is still being formulated with the hope of getting things back to normal within the coming months. But it's all over the place.
Right.
They're still,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, they're still figuring that out and working out those policies.
Let me say at this point that any of you that want to jump in, you can raise your hand to Amanda, and we'd love to hear from you, what your experience has been, what you see, any questions you might have. So please do join us. Okay, Amanda, go to our next slide. I think there's a good discussion to be had here, and I would encourage our audience to join it. We asked the respondents, did they believe that the COVID-19 crisis would have an effect on business location decisions going forward? And that's the first part of it. The second part is really, is that of potential help to rural areas? I know, well, the results first, 100%, 70% thought that there would be some effect on companies feeling less geographically tied to larger population centers with more interest in rural locations potentially. And then 30% thought there would be a significant effect. Nobody thought there wouldn't be any effect. And, you know, the whole geography of work question, the proximity of workers to their offices, their facilities is really under the microscope right now. Mark and I were talking yesterday about what General Electric did. Some of you might remember that. What, about 3 years ago, they decided to relocate from their suburban Connecticut headquarters, and they moved into the waterfront in downtown Boston. And if I recall correctly, the chairman or the CEO of General Electric was quoted as saying, you know, I look out my window and I see trees, but that's not what the knowledge workers that we are trying to attract want to see. They want to see restaurants and an urban lifestyle. And there was such a trend, wasn't there, several years ago, and I'm sure many of our listeners will recall when the labor market got so tight that a lot of communities said, hey, we don't need to recruit companies. We need to recruit skilled workers and laborers. And if we have the labor, they will come. If you build a labor force, they will come, because labor force was so tight. And I know, Mark, in your July edition, Ron wrote about several communities that are doing that. I know Savannah, Georgia has recently announced that they will pay relocation and a package to certain qualified tech workers that are moving in. Any thoughts, any comments on that?
Yeah, companies are really weighing the merits of decentralizing. Well, a number of companies are. Do they want to continue to require workers, say early next year, to commute to downtown Boston or downtown Atlanta, when they could commute to a suburban location where they have sort of a hub or a satellite office, if you will? And if you have those in some of your key markets, you know, that could well be an option that creates opportunities for flex time, for interpersonal interaction, without requiring people to take public transit all the way downtown. So a lot of companies, I think, are looking at that notion of decentralizing, and areas large and small will benefit, including rural areas that, you know, might not have been an option in the past. All of a sudden, hey, let's take a look at that empty former department store and see if we can't turn that into a, you know, a work environment that will benefit the company and the employees.
Absolutely. And we've all been reading about San Francisco and other cities that are where the rents are falling 25–50%. Of course, a lot of that is COVID, but much of that, I believe, is because some of these tech firms are allowing their workers to work remotely. And many, like Google, have announced that for the foreseeable future they can do that. Then that's leading clearly to an urban exit or a flow to suburban areas, smaller cities, but also rural locations as well. And again, that's really a change in the paradigm, isn't it? Where the major population centers were attracting firms because they had the educated population. In Chicago 2 years ago, I saw the boom in the West Loop area, but now all of that is changing.
You know, Robert, if you, we sort of need to overlay the other issue of the year, if you will, which is urban unrest in a lot of our urban centers. So it's really kind of a double whammy for cities especially in the Northwest, that are known tech centers. Well, there are companies that are leaving because they consider some of these places to be hostile.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I wrote about a company that, a big tech company that had operations in Seattle and Portland, and they're pulling up stakes and moving to Texas. And that has nothing to do with the COVID, but you kind of have to overlay, the extent to which companies want to be in some of these urban centers. It's a factor this year.
Absolutely. And Mark, could you share with us your thoughts on, and now, we don't want to paint a bleak picture for urban areas. I'm sure they'll survive just fine.
They will.
But could you comment, and Amanda, please, with your marketing and media experience, weigh in on
I think we just lost Robert. Your audio has gotten, you sound
right.
like
Can
Charlie
you hear me
Brown.
now?
There we go. There we go.
Oh, I don't know. Somebody touched the button. It must have been my cat. But I was asking Mark and Amanda to comment on how rural areas and smaller cities could take advantage of this changing geography of work trend.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've been doing, helping organizations and economic developers pivot is what we've been looking at is what does COVID make possible? Because the rule book got thrown out. And it has been, I'm more on and interacting with suburban and more rural communities. So I don't have as much urban experience, but it has been really, really pretty amazing how much we've been able to say, wow, we can get more specific when we're talking about what specific communities have. And it's been refreshing almost in the conversations that our clients have been able to have with their community, and going back to what both Mark and Robert have talked about, big emphasis right now is retention. And how do you make a stronger community? And in some of it, this is truly community development on the economic side to really help those businesses have the resources and come together in ways. So it's been really amazing watching that happen. We're building a lot more, like that's just more my experience. We're building a lot more internal networks of leaders to share ideas, to work faster, to do this in ways that my hope of this is that we keep those relationships and that camaraderie in place. This really like almost a tighter tribe kind of feeling with these leaders that, if we can hold and maintain that moving beyond COVID and in recovery, we're just going to have much stronger communities. We're sharing information in different ways. People are being more real about what their reality is and not just saying, oh, everything's great. They have to say, I'm really struggling here. This is my problem. And that back and forth. So it's almost more micro conversations that are then helping communities reposition in just a really, really beautiful way. And I'm seeing much more distinct, we call them in the branding world, like brand personalities, the personality of the community, of really understanding what each community has to offer, because it's not everything now. It's, leaning towards, Mark, towards the advertiser you were alluding to. Yeah, we're seeing a lot more of that, of things that people would not have thought about moving to a more rural area. It's huge.
Yeah, you mentioned micro, and to my mind, this whole pandemic recovery and so forth is a huge opportunity for micropolitans, which are smallish cities in rural areas. We've been writing for a long time about how access to talent is the #1 issue for site selectors. Well, that kind of goes away now, because a community, might not have 5,000 tech workers within 20 miles of its downtown, but it can now access remote tech workers from all over the country, right? Everybody knows how to work remotely now. we can be on Teams all day and be in touch with each other. We can set up calls like this. So they need to realize that their workforce doesn't have to be within 20 miles of their micropolitan. It can be anywhere. Mm-hmm. And they need to kind of message that and get the word out that they're, come into town a few times a year, work remotely. Where do you want to work? But we want your talent as part of the company here in this micropolitan.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's what's exciting about this, is there's a big emphasis back to quality of life, a balance that we're starting to lose. Businesses they have to think about that in their makeup, and they're forced to have everybody sign on remotely if they can, or if they're coming in, how are they taking care of their staff? So we're really just having to take care of our people in ways that we've never done like this before. So it's neat to see what's going to come out of, if we care for the people that make up all of these organizations, what can they start bringing to the table? How does that start allowing for innovation? So it'll be interesting to see what that dynamic is, because the workers are having to talk to leadership in different ways. So once again, I'm hoping some of those paths will stay open, and we're just going to see some really new ideas coming out of it.
Yeah, I guess I hope for the economic developers that are participating. Pat, for example, you're in a fairly rural area. This could be a real opportunity for areas to get the word out that, rural America now has even more reason to be a location for business, because it can access talent from anywhere. So economic developers can kind of help their city managers, if you will, kind of understand that as being an opportunity rather than a crisis.
That's one thing I'm really making some notes on. Would like to hear from what other people are doing that are in rural areas. What are you doing to get attention and to promote yourself as a potential location?
Any listeners care to comment on that, or send in some chat notes on that?
Robert, this is Rope. I'm going to comment from rural Northeast Georgia, from the 23 counties where I work. What I see as the biggest detriment to that is having the bandwidth available.
Yeah.
And bandwidth, you've got to be able to work from home, but you also have to have the connectability, and that is a requirement, which in many areas of our rural communities, they don't have it. If you're in the town, if you happen to have a fiber optic or a large cable area, then that's fine. But when you get into rural areas, it gets spotty, is the best way to say it. And so you don't have that connectability. That is I think that's what we're bringing up, is that's what we need to work on, is so we can attract people to live there. I have a good example of Charlie Mosley, and some of y'all may know Charlie is a project manager. He's worked at the state, worked in Henry County, worked at Metropolitan Atlanta, now he works for Georgia Power as one of our statewide project managers, and recently moved to the lower part of Oconee County, Morgan County, that area. But he's on a very rural farm, and the connectability is, it's important for him to be able to have that. And he had to have that connectability. Sometimes he has to go outside to connect. And you will see people doing that. You got to stand a certain way and hold your foot up and hope you don't lose your connection. But I find that even true in some cities, is that if you don't have, if you just don't have the bandwidth, then it's going to be very difficult to do a online presence, much less just to have a call, be able to be on a call and be heard without the sound going like that, which sometimes that happens.
Yeah, and Rope, this is Pat. Yeah, and we see a little bit of that in Putnam, where you've got 45% of the community is national forest. So you know, there's very few, there's some areas on the way from somewhere to there that you don't have a signal.
Yeah, Pat, we have the same problem in Raven County. As Rope knows, we have hills up in this neck of the woods, and that's a problem for a lot of companies that are wanting to install more bandwidth.
Well,
Rope made a great point. I think communities need to realize that they need to change their method of economic development. You know, I like to think that we economic developers and consultants are on the cutting edge, hopefully, most of us, a lot of us, with regard to what's going to happen in the future, as witnessed by the many great comments that we're getting in this webinar. But, you know, elected officials, they don't have the same body of knowledge that we do necessarily about what's happening and how the communities need to change. And they are the decision makers and check writers. So it gets back again to something we've worried about a long time, or thought about a long time at the Janus Forum, and that's educating elected officials, decision makers, and check writers on how things are changing and what has to be done. However, the COVID-19 crisis just wham, hit them in the head, didn't it? We're not the frog in boiling water anymore. We got hit on the head, and it's time for leaders to wake up and understand what they have to do to get their communities moving forward. Oh, any other comments? This is great. We're getting a lot of chat. We won't be able to answer all the questions, but we'll, like I said, we're going to send you a copy of the survey report, and we'll address some of these questions that we weren't able to get to. Thanks for sharing, everybody. Rick Clifton, I saw some of your comments. Dean Whitaker, great comments, everybody. We appreciate that. And we have just a few more points to make here, and then we'll call it a day. And if you could look at some of the highlights, if you will, of what we found out in the survey, obviously many economic development organizations are going to take a hit. We need to learn to do more with less by setting priorities. And demand for office and commercial real estate will decline. Dean Whitaker had a comment on that, saying that he's seeing a lot of leases are not being re-upped. So I think our economic development family needs to start thinking about how this space can be repurposed. I mean, Amazon is looking at excess or abandoned mall space for its distribution centers, and improving broadband, as we talked about. Boy, that's really critical. And next slide, Amanda. We've talked about that, so we can flip on through.
All right. Mary Lynn had a, hold on, let me unmute you. You had to let her jump in. Ooh. Mary, are you there?
Good morning.
Hey.
This is Mary Lilly. I just wanted to comment about the rural questions. And by the way, I'm with Greenfield, and we are working around a lot of rural areas right now. Number one, we had our very first client that was making a decision virtually on a site. And so I think economic developers have to consider the fact that they have to do a better job presenting information, especially on existing buildings that are perhaps not as pretty as they might be. That might be almost functionally obsolete. You're going to have to answer a lot of questions, and they're going to want to see pictures. They're going to see videos. They're going to want to see you open up, and you're going to have to do all of this virtually. At least that's what our experience has been with this client. And it was very unusual to have to go back through and go into every nook and cranny and videotape and organize and identify and label everything for them to be able to try and make a decision across the board on a piece of real estate. So I think that might be something to consider. How would you keep a big building, and how could you present it? It's not a house. but it's going to be different, and they're going to be worried about the roof and all those things. So that's one thing that broadband, we're going to need capabilities, not just with broadband across, but we're going to need production capabilities that perhaps some of you like Georgia Power can provide even more if this becomes a trend.
Mary, that's an excellent point. You know, in the site selection in the past was, you know, narrowing it down to 3, 4, 5 finalist communities, and we take the client to the community and they kick the tires and look over the community. That ain't happening as much as it used to. And there's been a trend in site selection even before COVID of just give me the numbers and I'll make a decision. But now that's even more the case. And if you're not able to virtually market your community and represent your community, then you're behind the curve. That's an excellent point.
Well, if it's a heavy industry, especially, they are very concerned about other liability of others' decisions, previous owners, all of that, and so they really want to try and visualize every hookup, every bus cut, everything.
Yeah, I agree. That's a terrific point, Mary. Economic developers in a lot of the bigger cities have become great at virtual site tours, but rural
areas
economic developers often don't have that. Don't have the resources. So maybe that's where, you know, the economic development divisions of the major utilities step in, because they do have the resources, right? So reach out to the Georgia Powers, the the big utilities, and get with them, and you know, it's going to benefit both the community and the utility if you can attract some exposure to these sites that are available.
And one more comment about broadband in rural communities. Right now, I'm afraid broadband is for industry is going to take a back seat to broadband for homes where there are children trying to go to school.
Yes.
When we couch our discussions with leadership, we need to make sure that we are couching them and don't try and overrun the schools, use the schools as the vehicle by which you get a better deal for your industries.
Yeah, great point again, Mary. Thank you for that. Okay, well, we're running just about out of time. I want to turn to Mark and Amanda and see if you have any final comments or thoughts, and then we'll make a final comment about some of our future webinars. Amanda and Mark, any comments?
I think my biggest thing is there's the great thing is there's no rule book. We get to try some new things, and the thing that we kind of live by right now is the idea of failing fast. So try new things, see how it goes. If it's not working, try something new. So that kind of rapid fire seems to be working really well. And really just getting curious has been so interesting to see how much people seem to be coming together in being apart. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that what we come out on the other side of this is going to be pretty great, actually, if we can just keep the important parts in mind moving forward and not get sucked back into that, as I like to say, glorifying busy that we kind of came out of. So
it's called the new normal. Mark, did you have a final thought?
Yeah, I guess, as I said earlier, you know, your workforce is not necessarily local. So it's really about how to get the word out that, you know, you've got a base of operations, whether you're in a big town or small. You want the talent, you're making it possible for them to live wherever they want. Ultimately, this pandemic recovery is an opportunity, no matter what size community you're in. You know, the economic development folks that are here are super, you know, as long as they continue to work with the leadership of their communities, I think it's gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Yeah, and I know we're getting some more comments and questions in. We are going to have to cut it off. We'll try to respond to those when we get the email out to you. And Amanda, I'm sure we can figure out a way to, well, everybody on the webinar has access to what other people have said, and it's recorded. Explain that.
Yeah, we'll send out a recording. We'll send the report. We'll have a summary. We'll have a copy of all the chat. Robert will share that with you, and then we can go through and do some specific answers to those as well. So we'll do a nice little recap so you can share this, look at it again, and I think a big call out for us is, like, if there's stuff you guys want to talk about and work through, we definitely have a lot more data in this report that we plan on. Our goal is to start doing this monthly. Let's get together and see what we need to do. This is the new version of the Janus Forum for the people who are familiar with that concept. And then we'll just, part of that model, tell us what you want to talk about, and we'll start pivoting to that as well.
Absolutely. And finally, the last slide about our future webinars, Amanda.
Yes, we've already gone ahead and penciled in Thursday, September 24th. So we'll make sure you guys know we're going to continue to talk about remote work and business decision locations. If you guys have some specifics around it, I know Robert's already been lining up some pretty great speakers to join our panel as well. But yeah, let's dig in together and figure out how do we look better for this.
Right. Yeah, I've been talking to some of my colleagues that are remote work experts, and also on how you identify people in your community that are good at remote work, how you identify who's good at remote work, who's not good at remote work, and how you encourage those characteristics. So this is just the beginning of the conversation. And I saw Rick Clifton made a comment about let's get together soon again, and I completely support that. And we're looking at ideas for how we can keep this conversation going, just like we do at the Janus Forum. We're going to sign off now. I really, really, really want to thank everybody for joining us. I think it's been an excellent discussion. It's I always tell people that it's a lot easier to talk than it is to listen. And thank you for listening today, and thank you for participating and giving us some great ideas. And we're going to put this all together, and that helps our thinking even more. Well, good luck to everybody in the new normal. Go out and have a great day, and stay with us. We'll be back, coming back in September, and let us know your comments. And Amanda, we want them to comment on this webinar, and we can do that. How?
Basically, we'll send out a recap at the end of this. Probably my guess is Tuesday will be the time we get it out to everybody. So you guys can just reply straight to that with any other specific ideas. You can also go to prosperousplaces.com and put some content in there for us to be able to respond to that. Or if you have Robert or my emails, just poke us. We'd be happy to add it to the mix. So yeah.
Thanks a lot. And it's so good to see some of my longtime colleagues in the field, as always. That's it for us. Have a great day, and thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Mark.
Everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.